I don't like horror films about torture. There's a reason for this. There's a reason why I don't. Now, look, um, as you know, I co-hosted Horror and Coffee with my buddy Victor, and he was the one who pretty much introduced me to the genre of horror films. But a portion of those horror films did have to do with things involving terrible, sick things that people would kind of do to other people. The particular one that sticks out right now in my mind is Mother's Day, which I rewatched again after over 35 years. And if you never saw Mother's Day, it came out like in 1980, and it was this pretty much sick a movie about this sick, sadistic old woman and her two young boys that would like hurt and torture, rape people, particularly women, in the woods. They would live in this house in the middle of the woods. That classic thought. And whenever and unfortunately there'd be a group of women. There was a group of women in the movie that they took advantage of, and you see them get back at them and all that. So there's this whole torture element, and then there's this whole revenge and justice element. Other torture films have that similar kind of sense of victimization and retribution for that victimization. Another such film I could think about is I Spit on Your Grave. That movie came out a little earlier, I think in the late 70s. I could be off on that by a couple of years. Where it involved a young woman who went to the woods, to a place to kind of relax and kind of like work on something. And she comes across this ugly band of guys who decide to take advantage of her in the worst possible way. The movie proceeds for her that she ends up coming back, and she kind of hunts them down like Michael Myers, like really, like she really does things to them. So there's this, again, a sense of victimization and then retribution. Now, the reason why I really don't like these kind of horror films per se, I've kind of grown up watching some of them, not all of them, but some of them. I've seen other films. The Devil's Rejects was one. The remake of I Spit on Your Grave is another one. I saw bits of Hostel. I saw the majority 4 Saw films. Many of these films, again, I do not take lightly to. And I'm going to give you my reasons. I like to categorize horror films. There's the supernatural kind. That's my favorite. There's, of course, the serial killers. There's, something sci-fi related, because I like sci-fi. And then there's this kind. Torture films, to me, are my least favorite. And I don't really like watching them. I'm not appealed by them at all. Because it's the kind of horror that is very relatable to the average person. You see, for me, I like to escape the real world when I go into a movie theater or pop in a Blu-ray or go streaming on Netflix or whatever, so I could see a movie that's crazy, that's really out there. It could be a zombie apocalypse. It could be Freddy Krueger, he gets you in your dreams. And yeah, Michael Myers, Jason, Leatherface, all of those to me are I like those films because it's not really about torture. Michael Myers doesn't torture you. Jason doesn't torture you. They don't rape you. They're not about that. They just want to whack you out and done. They kill you, they move on. When you see these torture films, it's like, man, death is better. Just straight up kill me straight is better. Not the slow torture, medieval, prehistoric caveman thing that they're doing. Here's another reason why I don't like these kind of films. This kind of horror brings out feelings inside me that I do not like. Let me give you an example. I went, back in 2010, I went to the movies with my Horror and Coffee buddy Victor to see the remake, the 2010 remake of I Spit on Your Grave. I remember the bits of it that he showed me in his VCR back in the early 80s. He was one of the first kids in the block to have a VCR. And we were all like, ooh, I want a VCR. And when we went to the movies to see that, I knew what I was getting into. The movie wasn't being run regularly like other films. There were limited showings everywhere because of the rating issue. It was very graphic and it was very painful to watch. I hate rape scenes in any movie. Like if it doesn't even have to be a horror movie. If there's a rape scene involved, I cringe and my blood boils. There's kind of like this sense of justice, and I don't want to call it righteous anger because I am in no way righteous by any means of the word. But it's kind of like I want God to come open up heaven and just strike them down, like right there. And I think that's the problem in this film. And we actually reviewed this in one of our early horror coffee films. I'll put the link below. That after they did what they did with her, she disappears from them. And she's gone for like a month. So they kind of forget about her after a while. But then she comes back. And when she comes back, she systematically hunts them down and does things to them that you wouldn't want to do to a farm animal. The part that got me even more than watching what they did to her was what she did to them. Because it brought about feelings in me that when the movie was over, I had to like really check myself on. There were feelings of justice was served. Yeah, good for those pieces of dirt that did that to her. In other words, this feelings of revenge, vengeance. When a person, any person, I don't care who you are, if you think that is the, I guess everybody has a moral code that they live by. And I'm not taking anything away from my buddy Victor. He's a very moral guy. He as a matter of fact, I think this is his way of trying to handle how real horrors can be vindicated and stuff like that. But my moral code is different. It just comes from a place of, I don't like how I'm feeling. I have to be self-aware of that kind of stuff. It's not a good feeling. And that's what made me feel uncomfortable about the second half of I Spit on Your Grave. It brought about feelings of a sense of vindication and justice on these evildoers that had it been the other way around and these were nice guys and they were just being killed off by this woman, she would be the bad guy. That didn't turn out to be the case. They were evil. What they did to her was horrific and was hellish. But you see, here's the thing. Again, it comes down to the truth that these kind of atrocities do in fact happen in real life. There's no such thing as Freddy Krueger. There's no such thing as Jason Voorhees that you can chop him down, you can put an axe through him, you can, saw him up, you can shoot him up, and he keeps coming back at you. That's not true. That's make-believe. Right there, that's make-believe. Incidents like what is depicted in films like Hostel, I Spit on Your Grave, even Mother's Day. Those things can and do happen in real life. Now, do they happen next door to me? No. But out there in the world it happens. And sometimes you hear about it in the news. Newspaper, CNN, NBC, whatever. And when you do hear about it happening in real life, your jaw drops, your heart drops, and you fear for your children's safety and you pray for it. And I do. Horror films are meant to entertain, not to exploit. Not to exploit these feelings that you get. Now, call me a softie. Maybe I am a softie for this kind of stuff. Maybe some of you are hardcore horror fans that think what I'm saying is, oh, you're not a real horror fan. Maybe I'm not. I do tend to lean more on the sci-fi things. I'm like more of a Star Wars fan than I am anything else. But I do love horror, and I do have my appreciation for it. But I like the kind of horror that lends to the imagination, not leaves little to it. That's the difference. I'll give you an example. I grew up in the South Bronx, and when I used to go to the local stores areas, they would have practically these shrines to Al Pacino's character, Scarface. In the South Bronx. And it's true. Like, people would spray paint, have a artwork of Scarface on their car, on their jackets. This was years ago. I don't see that really anymore. But when I was walking around looking at this, I was like, why are they glorifying this guy? Didn't they see what happened to him at the end of the movie? Just for the record, I enjoyed Scarface. I think it's a great classic. And Al Pacino is one of my favorite actors. So it's not even taking anything away from him. I love Al Pacino. I love all of his work. But the character that he depicted in Scarface was not a hero to be exalted. It was a criminal to, like, I've always looked at Scarface as a tragedy of a person that goes down the wrong path to destruction. And that's exactly what you see here. You know, don't live that kind of life. This is what would eventually happen to you. Scarface wasn't a horror movie, but it's a prime example of how such things can be glorified. Now, some of you also think, well, Ralph, you know, you like a lot of movies about the supernatural. The Conjuring, The Exorcist, Amityville Horror. Aren't those based on real, supposed real events? Yeah. I haven't hid anything about what I believe. I believe in God. I also believe in the devil. I do believe there is a spiritual battle raging between the two. I've never denied that. So that's as real to me as the real evil that human beings can inflict on each other in this world. So what's the difference? The difference is the potential for good that can overcome it. I'll give you an example. In The Exorcist, the updated version, the director's cut, after their first round of exorcism with Regan McNeil, Father Karras and Father Merrin are sitting in the steps all depressed. And Father Merrin, you know, tells something to Karras after he asks, why this girl? It doesn't make any sense. Why would this poor girl get possessed by a demon?
I think the point is to make us despair. To see ourselves as animal and ugly. To reject the possibility that God could love us.
See what I mean? There's a potential for good to overcome. There's a perspective there, you know? And even in other crazy films like, you know, like Freddy Krueger and all that, there is that potential for good to overcome evil. Same thing for the final conflict. You know, what happened, you know, the Omen 3. What happens at the end of Omen 3? Jesus comes back.
You have won nothing.
Even The Conjuring. Ed and Lorraine Warren, you know, they go to these cases. They help, you know, it's a movie scares the living daylights out of, you know, it's scary stuff. And yet they help the family. At the end, you know, they save the day. So that's another example. Now, not all of these kind of horror films have a good happy ending to it, but again, it still lends to the imagination. It makes you wonder what's next. What happened? This past summer, or last summer, I saw Hereditary, and you know, there was no happy ending to that at all. You know, but it had a point to it, and again, it lent to the whole idea of a kind of supernatural horror that leaves a lot open to the imagination. I mean, my goodness, what was that demon that possessed the little girl and then went into Peter? And, you know, so there's a lot there to work with. There's nothing to work with in torture films. They get captured, they get mentally tortured, they get physically tortured. If they happen to escape, they come back and exact revenge on them. That's it. You know, if you're feeling satisfied with that kind of revenge, I guess, okay, that's you. But for me, or for anybody like me, and I can't speak for anybody else but myself, it doesn't lend, again, the imagination. One film in particular that I know for a fact that I will never try to see because I don't want that to, like, I don't want to stain my soul with it, is a movie called A Serbian Film. Now, Victor likes torture movies, but even he won't. Actually, he did see it. But when he saw it, he was so disgusted with it, he threw out his copy. Because, you know, and we did a review of that, of why we don't review a Serbian film, which is kind of an oxymoron in a sense, but in a way we kind of did review it by saying we don't. A Serbian film was created somewhere in Europe, I think, and I forgot the director's name. I could care less about him, but he I think got arrested, or there was a warrant out for his arrest because of the content that he made. It was a horrible scary, potentially it can happen kind of movie. Now, there are horror movies that lend to more of a realism, that are very psychological in nature. I'll give you an example: Psycho. I love Psycho. Something like that can really maybe potentially happen in real life, but there's no, but there's that's more leans towards the psychological and not the atrocity attributed to it. You know what I mean? There's a different dynamic there. It makes you think. It challenges you to think. As a matter of fact, the closest kind of torture film, and I would hardly call it a torture film, it was more like psychological torture, that I actually enjoyed was the Saw films, at least the first three, because the fourth one going on was this. I liked those because there was some kind of, this whole thing with Jigsaw and the puzzles, and you got to figure it out, and who's gonna like cave in to, So that was kind of like wow. And then at the end, there was that music, dun dun dun, dun dun dun, dun dun dun, dun dun dun, and you see how everything kind of sums up at the end, and everybody just loses their mind, and they'd be like, oh, that's why.
Most people are so ungrateful to be alive. But not you. Not anymore. Game over.
I thought that was cool. Because it's psychological, it's a mind bender, right? But then when it comes to Mother's Day, when it comes to Hostel, when it comes to, I Spit on Your Grave, when it comes to Serbian film, those are the kind of films that depict and there's so many more. There's so many more that came, that sprung out of the 60s into the 70s, definitely into the 80s, that really like depicted this sad horror that personally for me, I don't care so much. I like my aliens. I like my Predators. I like my Freddy Kruegers. I like my Michael Myers. I like my Pazuzu. I like my, Jason Voorhees. I even like Jigsaw to an extent. And there's so many more I can think of right now. Pinhead, that another supernatural makeup flick, that you can like attribute crazy stuff to. I think that those films are worth a watch, but these other movies, if they bring about negative feelings in you that you don't like, don't bother with them. Don't bother with them. That's the reason why I don't like torture movies. And, that's my feeling of it. That's my opinion. These are my thoughts expressed. If you don't like it, that's okay. You don't have to agree with me. I'm just giving you my thoughts on it. But what are your thoughts? Do you like torture films? Talk to me. Comment below and share with me what you think about this particular brand of horror movie we call torture films. This is Ralph Perez from Strange Planet. Take care of yourself.